Go.
All right, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to the October 2024 meeting of LASO. Dr. Jean Wang is a hematologist and a leukemia researcher in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, with an interest in medical philately. She is an active thematic collector and exhibitor with a five-frame Grand Award-winning exhibit that explores the science and societal impact of blood donation and transfusion, and several one-frame social philately exhibits. Jean has given numerous presentations on medical philately and thematic collecting and exhibiting, and her articles on these subjects have appeared in various philatelic journals, including the Canadian Philatelist, the American Philatelist, Topical Time, and the Philatelic Exhibitor. Jean is the Royal Philatelic Society of Canada delegate to the Fédération Internationale des Philatelies Thematic Commission, and I apologize to anyone who speaks French because I have certainly butchered that. She's also a member of the board of directors of the Vincent Graves Green Philatelic Research Foundation, and since 2018 has been a member of Canada Post Stamp Advisory Committee. In 2023, she was the first Canadian to be appointed to the Board of Trustees of the American Philatelic Research Library. This evening, we have the pleasure of having Dr. Jean Wang share with us about topical and thematic collecting. Jean, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Paul. So I'm going to share my screen. So is everybody able to see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so tonight I'm going to talk about topical and thematic collecting and just mention exhibiting very briefly at the end. Really, I'm just going to focus on the sort of approach to topical and thematic collecting. I'm going to keep it very general, just kind of give some tips on how you can approach this for your own collection, the kinds of things that you can collect other than stamps, and explain the difference between topical and thematic, which a lot of people kind of use interchangeably, but they actually have different implications when you are, talking about a collection or an exhibit. So I'm going to keep it fairly short, I think, so that we'll have lots of time for discussion afterwards. Okay, so this is the outline of what I'm going to talk about. So basically, what is topical or thematic collecting compared to, in air quotes, traditional collecting? Go over some tips about topical collecting and what sorts of things, what sorts of considerations you might encounter when you're starting or expanding a topical collection. Looking at things beyond stamps, what kind of things you can collect other than stamps, which makes a topical or thematic collection, much more interesting and diverse, and can kind of keep your interest as well as you look for sort of diverse types of items. And then, as I mentioned, we'll discuss the difference between topical and thematic. So to start off with, what is a topical or a thematic collection? So in the sort of traditional way that probably I would say the majority of people maybe start out with, or most people at some point collect in this way. It really focuses on the philatelic aspects of the material that you're collecting. So you're looking at the stamp and how the stamps are produced and how they're used and the different rates, and maybe if you're into postal history, the routes that letters might take and the kind of markings that appear on the covers. Your collection will usually be organized according to these philatelic aspects. So you might collect, certain countries. So you're collecting all the stamps issued by country A or country B, or you might collect, an airmail route, looking for covers, that traveled that particular route. And your collection may include stamps or postmarks or postal stationery or postal history. So there's a lot of different types of sort of traditional collecting, right? Traditional postal history, postal stationery, but the common thing is that they all focus on the philatelic aspects of the material. In contrast, a topical or a thematic collection really focuses on the images or the subject that is depicted on the stamp or the cover or stationery, whatever it is that you're collecting. So it's not so much the philatelic aspects, but the images that are printed on the stamp. And typically these are not organized by country or other philatelic aspects of the material, but organized according to that topic or theme that you're collecting. So if you're collecting, stamps related to birds, you might organize your collection according to the different types of birds rather than where the stamps, what country issued the stamps. But the same as a traditional collection, your collection, a topical or thematic collection, can include any philatelic item. So it can include stamps, it can include postmarks, it can include postal stationery, and it can include items that you would consider part of a postal history collection. And I'll show you some examples of these as we go through the talk. So really what I love about a topical or thematic collection is that really it's only limited by the collector's imagination. So in contrast to, say, if you collect West Berlin, right? You want to collect all the stamps issued in West Berlin because there's a start and a stop. You can form a complete collection, and you can look up in one of the various catalogs, all the stamps that you need to collect in order to make a complete collection. For a topical or thematic collection, it's true that you will find, for some of the more popular topics, you might find a catalog of bird stamps or a catalog of, trains on stamps. So there are catalogs out there, but really I would say every topical or thematic collection is different, is unique, and really you as the collector, you can decide what you want to collect, what you want to include. You can decide you only want to include certain types of birds, or you want to include all of them. Really, it's entirely up to you, and you can make your collection what you want. And so that's, I think, the fun and the joy of topical and thematic collection, is that you can really, make it your own and do whatever you wish to do with it. So like I mentioned, the subject can be as broad or as narrow as you like. So just to give you some examples, people may collect flowers on stamps, and you may want to collect every kind of stamp that you can find that has a flower on it. But, other people may want to limit that and only collect orchids on stamps or certain other types of species of flowers. Birds is another very popular topic, as I mentioned. So you may want to collect birds on stamps. That's a huge collection. Or you may only want to collect loons on stamps, and that's probably a much smaller collection. Or owls, or falcons, or you may want to limit it to a subtype of falcons. I have a friend who collects peregrine falcons on stamps. Or you may want to make it a little broader and collect birds of prey. I know a couple of people who collect birds of prey. So they don't collect canaries or songbirds. They only collect, hunting birds. So like I said, you can make it what you want. Follow your own interest. When you're going to choose a topic, a lot of people decide to collect something that's related to the work that you do, right? An engineer may decide to collect stamps related to bridges or trains, something related to what they do in their day job. You may have other hobbies like gardening, birding, and you may want to collect stamps that are related to your other hobbies. You may want to make a topical or thematic collection around places that you have lived or that you have visited. So really, the sky's the limit. You can do anything. It can be a favorite food, a sport you like to play, an artist, a favorite artist, or an author, a favorite holiday, really anything that kind of tickles your fancy. So for myself, just to give you some examples, I'll give you some examples from my own collections. So I'm, as they mentioned in the intro, I'm a physician, I'm a hematologist. So I see people who have blood disorders, and probably just over 10 years ago now, I decided to start a topical collection. I hadn't been really a topical collector up till then, but I joined an online chat forum, and I joined my local club, and there were some other people that collected that were topical collectors. So I thought it'd be fun to try one. And I had gotten to the point where it was getting harder to find stamps for some of my country collections. So I looked around for something related to what I did. And what I ended up deciding to do was to collect stamps related to blood donation and blood transfusion. And I picked this because it was a topic that was relevant really to every country in the world. So there were a lot of, many different countries had issued stamps on this topic. And when I looked, did a quick scan, there were, I think at that time, just over 200 different stamp issues. So it seemed like a very manageable topic that I would be able to find most of the stamps without too much trouble. So I set out to do that. I figured out that the very first stamp that was issued on blood donation was issued by Hungary in 1942. It was part of a 4-stamp semi-postal set about the Red Cross. And one of the stamps showed a blood donor varadas, which I'm probably totally mispronouncing, means blood donation in Hungarian. So that was the first stamp that I could find that had been issued. And as I searched, I found a whole lot of other stamps, depicting various aspects of blood donation, from the actual donation to, appeals and showing nurses. So a lot of different aspects about blood donation and blood transfusion. So when you're starting to look for stamps for a topical collection, there's a few things you have to kind of think about and how you are going to approach them. And there's not any one right answer. I mean, you kind of have to decide what you want to do for yourself. But just to kind of talk about sort of the different options that you might encounter. So sometimes when you're looking for a stamp on your specific topic, you may find that there's a set of stamps that has a stamp related to your topic, but not all of the stamps in the set are related. So for example, this set of 4 stamps that was issued for the Ethiopian Red Cross Society, one of the stamps is related to blood donation. Right here's some blood collection bags, but none of the 3 other stamps are related to blood donation. So usually when you're buying mint sets, you have to buy the whole set. And then what do you do with that set? Do you keep it together? Do I just pull out the one stamp that's related to my topical collection and keep it with my topical collection? And then what do I do with the other 3 stamps? So these are just things that you think about. At the beginning, I just kept all the sets together chronologically in my album as I was accumulating them. Here's another example. So this is a set from the UK for the 50th anniversary of the National Health Service. And the 20p stamp here is related to blood donation, but the other 3 stamps are not. They're all health related. So, I've kept them together, and I've actually ended up using 1 or 2 of them in my exhibit. And we'll sort of talk about the, inclusion of sort of peripheral things a little bit later. You might find, so if you're a bird collector, for example, here's a set of 6 wildlife stamps issued by Jersey. 3 of the stamps have birds. So if you collect birds on stamps, do you buy this set? If you buy the set, 3 of the stamps have birds, the other 3 don't. Are you going to keep them together? Are you going to separate them out? So those are just kind of the considerations you have to think of. And even if you find a set that has all birds, so here's a set that has 6 birds, do you keep them all together in your album, or do you separate them out and keep them by species? So I have a friend who collects birds, and he breaks apart sets and keeps all the peacocks in one place and all the swans in another place. So, you can do with it what you want, but these are the kinds of things that you sort of have to think about as you're building your collection. I thought I would just mention, for people who are maybe just starting or who aren't aware, so for topical collectors, there are a couple of, at least, these 2 are I would say the ones that come up most often. They're stamp agencies that have contracted with some countries or postal administrations to issue stamps under their name. So Stamparija is a big company that does this. They're now called Stampera. They're based in Lithuania. And then IGPC, the Intergovernmental Philatelic Corporation based in New York, also does this mostly for, I think, for Caribbean countries, whereas Stamparija tends to be sort of African countries. So they issue a broad, or, I would say very large number of stamps that are really directly targeted to topical collectors. So these are, kind of flood the new issue market, and they issue them on topics that are very popular with collectors, like dinosaurs, or during the COVID pandemic, there were a ton of stamps that were issued about different aspects of the COVID pandemic. You'll find birds, you'll find famous people, physicians, like basically anything where they think there's a market for topical collectors and they can sell the stamps, they'll issue the stamps. Most of these topics often don't have anything to do with the issuing country. It's just the name of the country is the contracting postal administration that allows these stamps to be issued. So they're technically legal stamps, but I would say very often they're not actually available for sale in the local country. So if a person who lived in Togo, for example, walked into the local post office, the majority of these stamps wouldn't be available for sale for that person to buy. And often the face values are so high that they're not even really usable on regular mail anyway. So they're not really meant for postal use. by the people that live in that country. So, you know, they're legal, as I mentioned. A lot of these stamps are listed in Scott. Scott does list all of these. Some of the other catalogs, like I think Mickle doesn't list these. But a lot of collectors tend to avoid them because, number one, they're very expensive. There's a lot of them. You end up spending a lot of money, and they're considered what's called like wallpaper by a lot of collectors, like not real, or not legitimate or authentic in terms of, you know, the sort of spirit of what stamp issues are supposed to be. So that's just, you know, a little sidebar there. Okay, so getting back to topical collection. So, you know, when I was looking for stamps for my blood donation collection, I was, you know, putting in search terms, and a lot of things would pop up, and I was buying a lot of the stamps, but other things started popping up. So things like meter marks like this. This one in particular I really like. So this is a meter mark from Northern Ireland. So here's the meter part of it, which is paying the postage, but these often will have slogans attached to them. And in this case, you know, it's a bit humorous. It's the Northern Ireland Blood Transfusion Service saying, you can't get blood from you can't get blood from a stone, neither can we. So, you know, this is something that certainly would fit in my collection about blood donation and blood transfusion. And I had never really collected anything like this before, but I thought, you know, they weren't that expensive and they were interesting to me. So I started collecting these too. So I started adding these to my collection. Here's another example. This meter is from Belgium, and it shows, you know, a male and female figure, and there's 4 blood drops with the 4 major ABO blood types. So that got added to my collection. And then I started finding, you know, commemorative postmarks. So a lot of these might be associated with a specific stamp issue, or they might commemorate a certain event, or might be produced by a club for a stamp show or something. Often they're only available for a limited amount of time, but they show different aspects of different topics as well. So I started collecting these as well when they popped up. This is a postmark from Italy that shows a mobile blood donor unit here, that, you know, these are buses that would go around to smaller communities and hold blood donor clinics there. And here's a machine cancel from Trieste. So after the Second World War, it was one of the sort of militarized zones. And there's a machine, there's a slogan attached to this machine cancel that says, donate blood to the bank, to the blood bank. So these are other things that you can collect, that you can add to your collection to kind of, you know, spice it up a little bit and increase the interest beyond just collecting the stamps. Then you can add even other things. So things like postal stationery. Here's a postal stationery envelope from Bulgaria that has a, you know, so it's stationary because it has a pre-printed indicium. And the cachet here shows a woman carrying a child. And the translation of this here is citizens become blood donors. So it's a blood donor appeal. This is a postcard from Romania. This is one of a set of 6, actually, and all 6 are related to different aspects of blood donor appeals for blood donors. So this particular one says giving blood is an act of high patriotism. So I started adding these. So you can see my collection started to grow beyond just stamps. There's a lot of interesting advertising that you can find on postal stationery as well. So this is an example of what is called a Poubelle card from Belgium. So these were, these had printed indiciums or indicia that you can see here. And then they had advertising printed on the card. And so you still paid face value, but the income from the advertising was used to pay for different types of social services. So you can find Poubelle cards that have a whole gamut of different types of ads, from, you know, food, health, travel, cars, like there's all kinds of stuff you can find. So if you're a topical collector, this is a real treasure trove of stuff that you can find related to your topic. This is an example of an echo card from Japan. So very similar. So it's got a printed indicium, in this case, 50 yen. And the ad in this case actually subsidizes the cost of the card. So the post office would sell these cards for 5 yen less than the face value, and then you would just mail it. This was the postcard rate at the time. So again, this particular one shows a donor hooked up to a plasmapheresis machine, so he's donating plasma. So you can again find a huge range of topics in the ads on these cards. So These are fairly straightforward to add to my blood donor collection because they're, directly showing my topic. And that, like I said at the beginning, you can collect, there's a whole wide world of stuff that you can collect, and every collection is going to be unique. And you can't, you don't have to be limited by a catalog like you would be for, say, a country collection of stamps. So I started to also come across things like this. So advertising on a tab. So in France, there were a lot of examples of these, in other countries as well. Denmark, Belgium did this. So they would print sheets of stamps, and in the tabs of the stamps, you would find ads. And this particular one is advertising a product called beer, and it says pour les anémies, which means for anemias. So, so this is something that I did add to my collection, although it doesn't directly show blood donation or blood transfusion. So, does this belong in my collection? That leads to the question of what's the difference between a topical and a thematic collection. So let's explore that a little bit. So a topical collection is a collection in which every item in your collection depicts your topic. So for example, if you have a collection on butterflies, everything in that collection, whether it's a stamp, a postmark, a meter mark, a stationery, everything that you collect has a picture of a butterfly or a moth if you want. So consider it as a kind of like an illustrated catalog. So everything shows the item that you're collecting. In contrast, a thematic collection is a collection where every item either depicts the topic or it depicts a related aspect of that topic. So if we're going to stick with butterflies, think of it as, and I just found this image on Google. So it's a storybook about butterflies. So it talks about, the little promo blurb said, learn about the magical world of butterflies, their beauty, their importance to plant life, their incredible metamorphosis and migration. So these are all things that are related to a story about butterflies, right? So the things in your collection may depict butterflies, but they may also depict plants or flowers that are pollinated by butterflies, or they may depict a map that shows the migration routes of the butterflies. So they may not necessarily show a picture of the butterfly, but they show some aspect of the story related to butterflies. So that collection now becomes more of an illustrated storybook where you have things that are illustrating different aspects of the story, and they may not necessarily show a butterfly on each item. So that's kind of the main difference between topical and thematic. So then if you're considering this, then this little advertising tab that I showed before, even though it doesn't directly depict blood donation or blood transfusion, it certainly depicts a related aspect, right? Where people who have anemias may need a blood transfusion. And so it certainly, belongs in a thematic collection related to blood donation and blood transfusion because it talks about the need for blood and why people might need transfusions. So I wanted to give some more examples too from another one of my collections, just to kind of cement, the ideas that I'm talking about. So I have an interest in medical philately. So during the pandemic, I started collecting all the stuff that was coming out about COVID-19. And so if you're gonna say limit your collection to a COVID-19 topical collection, what does that mean? That means every item in your collection is going to have a picture of the COVID-19 virus, right? So it's a topical collection. You're showing COVID-19 on every item. So here's the very first stamp that was issued by Iran that shows the picture of the virus, even before it was named COVID-19. Here's a stamp from, this is actually a private post stamp from Germany. There's a lot of sort of private carriers in Germany. This particular one is called Elster Post, and they have a sort of magnified view of the COVID-19 virus here. This is a postmark that was produced in Zagreb, Croatia. There's an interesting story around this one because the planned emission or issue date was 30th of April, but a couple of days before it was supposed to be issued, there was a big earthquake that actually really damaged the post office where it was going to be issued. And so they changed the location of the post office and moved the issue date. I might have these reversed actually, because I see the date here is later. But anyway, that's the story. It got postponed. So I think this was probably the first one, and this is the later one. This is an issue from Serbia where it was a children's art design contest. And so a lot of the images of the stamps, from the children's artwork reflected the sort of mood and the sadness and isolation that the children were feeling. But also in the salvage of the sheet, there was a little picture of a coronavirus. So, if you have a topical collection of coronaviruses, you can add this to your collection. Here's a stationery from the Vatican that showed an image of the virus and somebody injecting it, maybe with a vaccine or something to kill it. So, you can add this aerogram to a topical collection. But there's so much more to the story of the COVID-19 pandemic that, you can really expand your collection beyond just a topical one. So if we're just sticking with stamps, think about all the different aspects of the pandemic that you can collect and use to tell the story, right? So we can talk about social distancing. Here's a couple of women sitting apart, separated by the distance of 6 coconuts laid side by side. When kids eventually went back to school, Singapore issued a set of stamps to encourage them, to wash their hands and wear masks and other kinds of things to keep them safe. There was a lot of testing done, right? So once the tests came in, there was drive-through testing. This is a label produced by Israel that's showing a car driving through a test center. We all felt social isolation from staying home and being in our little bubbles. So Belgium issued a stamp to reflect that. Austria issued 3 different stamps actually that were kind of unusual stamps. So this one is made from face mask material in the form of a face mask, to kind of talk about that aspect of the pandemic and people wearing masks. All the essential workers that kept, groceries going and post office and postal services, and then vaccination. So, if you're going to stick to stamps, there's still a whole wide range of stuff to collect, and none of these depict a coronavirus. So, you don't have to limit yourself to a topical collection, but expand it to a thematic collection. And then, of course, you can start looking at stuff beyond stamps, right? So there's slogans and meters. These are a couple from Australia, machine cancel, and a meter mark from Germany, which is a play on words. Impfen means vaccination. So Impf Frankfurt was, this was a Frankfurt city meter to encourage vaccination. There's picture postmarks. These are a couple from Taiwan showing the Omicron variant, a COVID-19 test here. Canada Post produced free stationary postcards that they distributed to every household so people could try and write to each other and stay connected. So this was something that several different countries did. Postal history, so you can find letters, because there was a lot of disruption in flights, and mail couldn't go between countries a lot of times, so there was a lot of returned mail. Here's a letter that was returned to sender from Taiwan when it was going to Toronto because there was no mail service. China Post started putting these labels for disinfected mail. This was a letter that was held in quarantine in Thailand before it was ultimately delivered with a hand stamp saying delivery was delayed due to COVID-19. So there's a lot of interesting stuff you can collect, even design errors. So this is a stamp from Poland that was promoting vaccination, and they've got the bandage on the biceps, but of course that's not where you get vaccinated. You get vaccinated on your deltoid, right? As you can see from this postmark and this stamp here. So, it's just an interesting design error that you can add to your collection and talk about as well. So, in the evolution of a collector, I would say, you start off by deciding on a topic you're going to collect. If you've never collected, I think it's something that's really fun. I know a lot of sort of traditional collectors that have big traditional collections, but have a little side collection on a topical, a little side topical collection on something that they do just for fun. So you decide you're going to collect butterflies, you start looking for stamps related to butterflies. You might encounter other things like picture postmarks and all the other things I talked about. And then gradually, as you build your collection and you start organizing it around the different storylines, you'll see that, these storylines start to take place, and that kind of naturally evolves from a topical collection into a thematic collection. And exhibiting, really, thematic exhibiting is really all about just telling the story. And, it's telling a non-philatelic story that's illustrated with your philatelic material. And I would say, just like a topical collection or a thematic collection differs from a traditional collection in these aspects, a thematic exhibit differs in the same ways, right? So you're organizing the story based on it's a non-philatelic story. You're not focusing the story on the stamps or the roots or anything like that. You're telling completely unrelated, non-philatelic story, but you're using your philatelic material to illustrate that story. And that's a lot of fun, actually. And if you want to dip your toes in it, if you've never done it, you want to try your hand at it, you can start small just with one-page exhibits. The American I checked actually this evening, the American Topical Association has a seminar coming up on the 26th of October. If you look on their website under events, you can register, it's free, and they're going to talk about creating a one-page exhibit. They have a non-competitive one-page exhibit every year. It's not judged, it's just for fun for people to, try their hand at it. If you want to go and be a little more competitive, the British Topical Association does have a judged one-page virtual competition. I don't know if they're doing it every year now or every second year, so this might be an off year for them, actually. So I think that's my last slide. So thanks for your attention, and I hope I've left enough time for a good discussion afterwards.
Very good. Very good. There we are. Thank you very much there, Jean. I'm a topical thematic collector and exhibitor myself, as I know many of you are as well too. It is probably the most fun you can have in the hobby, because literally you touch each and every type of philatelic element and aspect that you can potentially imagine offhand. So consider it and think about that. We will go ahead and open things up to questions. I'd ask, if you will, please go ahead and put your hand up. You'll see at the very bottom part of the screen, there's something that says raise hand. If you'll raise your hand, we'll recognize you and we'll point you on out from there, okay? Give me just a moment. There we go. And if you have a question at this point, go ahead and raise your hand. For those of you who are not on video, of course, we can't do that, but we can go ahead and you can put a note, if you will, in the chat box, and you can put your question there as well, too, if you will.
Tom, I'm not sure if you can see it, but I'm seeing Glenn Minshall has his hand up, and there was someone
okay.
also.
Yeah, please go ahead and take it away. Otherwise, please keep yourself muted. When you want to speak, unmute yourself. Go right ahead.
Sorry, Glenn, your audio's not really coming through. Can you try again?
Oh, can you go ahead and type your message in the chat box, please? I'm afraid the video or the audio is not coming through. Okay, let me ask, anyone else have any questions or any comments that you'd like to make? You're welcome again to raise your hand or put a note in the chat box.
This is Bill Schultz. I
Yes.
don't know if I got my hand raised or not,
That's all right. Go right ahead.
but I just wanted to toss in. I started a topical collection on roses a number of years ago. And one of the treasures I found as I got into more following the presenter's evolution into theme collection, I got into postcards of roses. and especially in the golden age of postcards, you know, maybe 1895 to 1915 time frame. Some of the printing and the artistic craftsmanship of postcards was just stunning
Yeah, there's
as
a
far
lot
as how
of
good it.
there's a lot of overlap between, I would say, philatelists and postcard collectors or deltiologists.
Yeah, and this was not postal stationery. It was,
Yeah.
you know,
You mean picture postcards?
it's mind blowing back then for 3 cents what they did for a postcard.
Yeah. You know, I have expanded some of my medical philately collections to include some postcards as well, especially the older ones, as you say. They're really beautiful and they can enhance the story, and you can certainly include them in a collection. There's certain rules for thematic exhibiting where you can't include picture postcards in a thematic exhibit, but you can certainly include them in a display, and I think also in a topical exhibit, but not in a thematic. But I mean, your collection doesn't have to know any boundaries, right? You can collect whatever you want.
Absolutely. Sherry, go ahead. You have your hand up. Unmute yourself.
When you collect things other than stamps, what do you put them in, or how do you arrange them?
So it depends. I have binders with page protectors, and I bought a little sort of a fuser that people who scrapbook use, and you can make little pockets in the page protector, and you can cut a slit and you can slip things in. So you can make like you know, a little divider so you can put two things, or you can buy like postcard pages that you can put like 4 postcards in a page. So you know, there's different kinds of page protectors that you can buy with different arrangements of things, and I usually will have those in a binder, or else a lot of the COVID stuff I haven't gotten around to organizing it yet, so I have it in like, you know, just plastic boxes organized in different ways. I don't know. There's a lot of stuff on my desk that I haven't gotten around to sort of making proper album pages or, you know, or do anything with that. But it's definitely a good idea to kind of try and stay on top of it and organize it at least a little bit, so you at least know what you have and what you don't have, and you don't end up buying, you know, duplicates of stuff that you already have. So, but yeah, it does get more bulky, certainly, as you go beyond stamps, for sure.
Okay, any other questions? Just go
So
ahead. Okay, Sally.
Hi, I was just wondering, is there anything that's too far afield? I mean, you could potentially include some pretty far out there stuff, and you can probably make a link with just about anything to a thematic collection. I'm just wondering how do you decide what to put in? I mean, does that make sense, or is that?
Jean, you're muted. I'm sorry.
do you mean like in terms of how connected it is to the story?
Yeah, I mean, there seems like you could expand it way far out. And
Yeah, I mean, you know, so for one, the number one thing is you can make your collection what you want, right? So if you want to include it, by all means include it. When I was working on my exhibit, so I have a thematic exhibit about blood donation and blood transfusion, you know, you start to explore different aspects of the story and different you know, subplots, if you will. So, you know, everything like a good storybook, you know, the story that you tell should still have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it should progress logically through the chapters, and there should be some logical connection as you're reading through the story, right? Like any book that you read should have a natural progression like that. So, you know, but when you're looking for things to illustrate those different points, you can find things that either, you know, show it directly, or you know, the thing I've gotten into more recently is illustrating conceptual ideas through analogy. You can actually, like, I actually wrote an article about it that was published in the American Philatelist in September, talking about using analogy as a device for illustrating concepts that would be difficult to show you know, to find actually illustrated on a stamp or a cover. So, you know, there's not, you know, if you can find a connection and it seems logical to you, I would say go for it. And, you know, there's like, it's your collection, right? You know, if it's too much of a stretch and you have it in an exhibit in the frames and the judge is looking at it, I mean, Tom can maybe address this, but, you know, some judges may say, okay, that's a little bit of a stretch. You know, you shouldn't include an item that's like a real wow item that seems like you're kind of just wedging it into, you know, by making this sort of really tangential connection to
Oh,
the
go
story.
ahead,
Because you
stretch
really-
it. We love that. We love to see stuff like that. Come on.
But yeah, I mean, you know, it's really, it's up to you, like how connected you want the things to be and the different storylines. And, you know, just because somebody else has done it this way doesn't mean you have to tell the story that way. You might find a different angle for, you know, for telling that story, or different aspects to explore.
Jean, you might want to give an example about a fang.
About
Fang? Teeth?
oh,
Yeah, go
are you
ahead. I
referring to
think
my
that's a real
vampire,
good one. Yes, there you
my
go.
vampire bite? Okay, so what Tom is referring to is, so I have in my exhibit about blood donation and blood transfusion, I talk a little bit about the history of blood and, you know, the religious aspects, and then blood in mythology. And so I, you know, talk about vampires, right? Because vampires live on blood, right? Vampires drink blood. They take the life force of blood. So to illustrate a vampire, what I used, you know, and there's lots of stamps that show vampires or, you know, vampire stories. But what I used was so in the early Canadian stamp issues of the 3-cent small queen. So it was a workhorse definitive stamp, and like millions and millions were produced. So there were often sort of what are called constant plate varieties, where somebody drops something on the plate and it makes a little mark. And so a whole bunch of stamps are printed that have this little variety. And so there's a variety which is called a vampire bite constant plate variety, because it's got 2 marks that show up just on the queen's neck. They're little triangular marks that basically look like a vampire bite. And those marks gradually over 4 years, as they kept using the plate and printing the stamps, those marks gradually disappear because the plate got worn out. So I have a little study showing how, you know, over the 4 years, the vampire bite marks gradually disappeared. So I use that to illustrate vampires, you know, so it's you know, it's something from sort of traditional philately. It's talking about a constant plate variety. When you look at it, it has nothing to do with blood, right? It's a small queen definitive. But if you can make the connection in your philatelic description of the item and connect that to your thematic story, then that's totally legitimate. So you can have a lot of fun. You can have a lot of fun with thematics, right? Looking for different ways to incorporate stuff into your collection.
You bet. Bob Thompson, go right ahead. Unmute yourself, please, Bob. Bob?
Yes. The question that Glenn Minshaw was trying to ask was, could you define imidicium?
Oh, indicium. So
Indicium, okay.
indicium, yeah. So what an indicium is, so on postal stationery. So postal stationery is, you know, can be an envelope or a postcard or an aerogram that has a pre-printed stamp on it. So that pre-printed stamp is called an indicium. Plural is indicia. So that's the definition of a postal stationery, is that, you know, the postal administration prints this envelope, postcard, aerogram, form, whatever, that already has the stamp printed on it. You can use that in a thematic exhibit, versus a picture postcard where the picture is printed and on the back you have to add an adhesive stamp. So that technically is not allowed in a thematic exhibit, but by all means include it in your collection if you so desire.
Great. Let's see. Dave Elson, go right ahead.
It's one of the things about topical collecting that I really appreciate, is because the lack of rules in so many ways. And I'm not an exhibitor, but my collection includes everything from, I mean, there's a million poster stamps and Cinderellas, German emergency money, the note geld from the early 20s, has all kinds of different topics on it, including mine. So I include that, of course. Even matchbooks from all over the world have so many different themes on them. So it may be a sin to many of you more rigid philatelic collectors, but for topicalists like me, we don't have many boundaries. We don't there's not many barriers to keep us from adding anything we want to the collection. So it can really go far afield if you want it to.
Yeah, so Dave, I have in my blood donation collection, I have phone cards. I have some Cinderella stamps. I have some matchbook covers. There were whole sets that were issued, like I have some from Czech Republic that were like a set of 12. So yeah, as you know, you can, in your collection, you can collect whatever you want. It's just when you go to exhibiting, some classes are a bit more rigid in terms of the type of material you can include. But if you want to include all this kind of ephemeral stuff, you can go in display class, which, you know, lets you basically include non-philatelic as well as philatelic material, and it, you know, disperse it all through the exhibit. So, and that it actually encourages, you know, to collect a variety of this other non-philatelic stuff like badges, medallions, coins, you know, Boy Scout badges. I have a friend who has a display exhibit on, you know, Larry Davidson has a display exhibit about beavers. He has a beaver tooth fossil. He's got a swatch of beaver fur, you know, like you can, sky's the limit, right? Anything you can imagine.
Great. Zori, go right ahead and ask your question, please. Unmute yourself.
Thank you. I'm on the phone, so it's showing still muted on the
Okay.
but I had also wanted to inquire about the indicium, so thank you for responding to that. I wondered, since you had mentioned, well, let me first say thank you for a beautiful and very informative presentation with many great ideas on displaying material. You mentioned, I think, under thematic, you sort of semi-defined what it is to fit into the category of thematic. And I wondered, where would one new to this find the definitions and rules for thematic display and topical and so on? Thank you.
So, I mean, Tom is a judge, so he can maybe speak to this better, but there is a handbook of philatelic judging and exhibiting, which is available on the APS website, that has the guidelines for the kinds of things you can include in all the different exhibiting classes, including thematic, display, and topical. So you can use that as a starting point, and then Dr. Ed Andrews wrote a book recently that talks about display versus topical versus thematic, if I'm correct, right, Tom?
Yes, indeed. Yep.
Yeah, and that's available through, I think you can find it on Amazon.
Amazon's has it, yes.
Yeah.
So there are references available in that regards. And again, don't forget the American Topical Association website. You will find a number of resources there that will clearly help you in that regards.
Thank you.
Okay, we do have a question here in the chat. Do you have any recommended resources for researching connections between philatelic materials? Kind of a broad question.
I'm not sure what exactly you mean by connections. Do you mean like how to describe the
didn't really
philatelic?
explain it, but perhaps the Fang idea perhaps put something in this person's mind offhand.
Yeah, I mean, you know, when you're, how should I put this? When you're when you're looking for things for your collection, I would say just keep an open mind. Because I often will find things or come across things when I'm looking for something else, or when I'm listening to a topic, a presentation about some unrelated topic, and somebody, or show and tell, for example, and somebody will show something. And when I'm looking at it, I'm going, oh, there's something interesting about this where I could use that to illustrate a certain concept, through analogy. But you also, if you're flipping through auction catalogs or just looking online on Del Camp, I find is a really great resource for finding all kinds of stuff that you didn't know existed. When I searched for blood, all kinds of things come up, right? Stamps, but also meters, stationery. So, there's no, like I said, there's no catalog, which means your collection can be unique, but that's a little bit of a drawback too sometimes, because you don't know what's out there, right? So, but if you go on to like a site like Del Camp, which is like eBay, but it's based in Europe, and thematic and topical collection is really big in Europe. So a lot of sellers list items with thematic or topical keywords because they know there are topical or thematic collectors looking for these things. And so, put in the keyword that you're looking for, put it in French, put it in German, because there's European sellers that might be describing their material in different languages, and you'll be surprised sometimes the kind of stuff that pops up in your searches. So I don't know, it's not a very specific answer, but I hope that answers the question a little bit.
All right. I'm just going through again chat here just to make sure I haven't missed any questions in there. Thank you for the reminder in that regards. I am kind of going backwards as well too. Again, there's a question about indicia. And let's see. I think that probably will do it. Anyone else have any questions? And if not, I'm going to turn things on over to Bob Thompson. He'll wrap things on up for us here this evening.
Well, thank you for a wonderful presentation. I have, before we close, 3 announcements. I have posted the evaluation link for tonight's presentation in the chat session so that you can directly click on it. Another announcement is that just a reminder that on November 19th, our next meeting, Glenn Minshaw will be presenting on New Zealand stamps from A to Z. And then we had a schedule change for December. So rather than have a formal program, what we thought we would do is have in a sense, a social hour where people can get together in small groups, introduce themselves, talk about what they collect, so that we can get to know one another a little better in that format. So kind of in the holiday spirit. Any questions about any of that?
This is
Dave, yes, go right ahead, Dave.
I wasn't sure how to show my screen, so I put actually a picture in the comments if anybody wants to look at that. It's sort of matches with what we're doing today and not. I believe October is National Stamp Collecting Month in the US each year, or Philatelic Month or Philatelic Month or something. I'm not sure exactly what they call it. But in the picture, and I'd share this on my screen if I knew how, somebody at the library had asked me if I could put together a little display in a display case just to try and interest people in stamp collecting itself. And so sort of the theme of the picture is a variety of mostly US stamps, but also a whole bunch of peripheral tools and things that might be used in stamp collecting. And so you might just look at that for grins and see if that has any value for anybody.
By all means, yep, go right into the chat, click the chat button down at the very bottom there, and
Okay.
you'll see
Almost
Dave's
done.
picture right there.
Yeah.
And
Oh, you
click
can't
on
see
that.
it. Okay.
Great. I'll just wrap up this evening. Jean, thank you again. Wonderful presentation. I'm sure you've opened the eyes of many collectors out there of what they can possibly do. It's a lot of fun. You'll enjoy yourselves, and you'll meet so many nice people in the hobby, won't you there, Jean?
Definitely.
You all
Definitely.
realize that. I will
Don't be
say
shy.
give you one more tidbit here. If you go to our webpage at Learning About Stamps Online or learningaboutstamps.org, we have a new page up there on philatelic guides. Thank you to everybody in the group who volunteered to share your experiences and your knowledge with other collectors. That page is now active. It is online. And if you have a question about any particular area of philately, either geographic or by item, or any specific questions on stamp collecting that you would like an answer to, we have a lot of people who volunteered their services to answer those questions for you. So go take a look at our website, and that page will have all the information you need to send your questions on out and get an answer from many of your fellow members right here. With that, we'll go ahead and wrap things on up. Again, thank you all for joining us. Reminder, we'll see you in another couple weeks. Take care. And with that, we'll stop the recording.